Hello and good day to you. My name is Nathan and welcome to Limping Through Models with Nathan. This week we're going to be focusing on painting the walls. We're going to be attaching the walls to the frame, which, as we noted last week, could stand on its own, but in this build I wanted to put the walls on the frame. And then we're going to start on painting the trim work that we're going to put on later in another video. So with all that in mind, let's get started. I start with staining the walls with the same staining solution that I used for the frame in last week's episode, taking in consideration the vertical boards that are cut into the wood. For some of the boards I applied more stain than the others so that there's variation in the coloration of the boards. Then with a sponge I apply a coat of red paint thin enough to show these variations in the boards. Now I had attempted to go darker on the edges and lighter towards the middle of the wall, but that effort didn't really work out, and I decided to just make it as uniform as I could across the board, while at the same time maintaining those patchy areas of paint to be able to show that stained wood from underneath. I sponge all the walls in the same manner in an effort to have a uniform color across the entire structure, and touch up here and there as well. To add some extra gruff to the walls, I get out my trusty wire brush and scrape off some of that paint that we just put on all four of these walls. The next thing here is probably one of my favorite things to do in modeling, and that's dry brushing. Some people like to remark about their glory days in high school being on a football team or something like that. The glory days I like to brag about is how I was the go-to person in my theater production class for anything having to do with dry brushing. I put a very small amount of paint on this brush, just enough to put a very light coat of, I think, parchment paint on these walls. Most of that paint really caught on the windowsills and the corners and edges of the walls overall. After the sponging, the wire brush, and the dry brushing, I got a wild hair and had a crazy idea. I felt bad for the brown stain just for the fact that the gray stain was receiving all the glory for this project. So I decided to take this stain and apply it over top of all the work that I've done so far on aging these walls, just to see what it would look like and maybe, come up with some sort of new thing. But then I've come to quickly realize that in the world of modeling there's really nothing new. It's just that a lot of great people have great ideas. They just happen to realize those ideas at different times. So after all that work, here's a close-up of the front wall after the sponging, the wire brush, the dry brushing, and the stain. All together it's looking great so far, but a byproduct of using that stain was that it warped because we were putting a lot of stain on one side of it. So I got me a trusty yearbook from back in the day, put that on top of everything, and then took a 20-pound kettlebell that I had lying around, because I don't use it, and put it on top to distribute the weight. I left this weighted contraption on top of the walls overnight in an effort to flatten out the pieces, because the next part is very important that these pieces are flat, because we're going to start putting the walls on the frame. However, the first thing we need to do is put the floor of the loft in the frame itself. Now this is the loft that would be visible in the opening that's at the gabled end of the front of the barn. And this piece was warped, so I had to get some glue to glue it down, and this was a pain in the butt to keep flat. I had to weigh it down probably for a good 10-15 minutes, trying different variations and different configurations of holding the frame so that I could have a full grasp on the loft piece while giving it ample time to cure appropriately. Again, I have a lack of clamps that's able to facilitate this type of hold, so I had to take my time to hold it. Now comes the fun part where the barn actually starts to come together. so I get to start to apply the walls to the frame. I decided to do some test fitting on the front first just to see how it would line up, and it lines up pretty well with that front frame piece. So I start to get some glue, tack that glue on, and then go in and get the wall and set that in place. Now for this I was able to use some clamps to clamp these wall pieces together, clamps that are appropriate for the job. I then employed two more clamps, my thumb and index fingers, to the top of the wall to pinch that against the frame. There was still some minimal warping on the wall, so I had to apply some glue to the frame but right behind the front opening, and then affix that wall to the frame, holding that in place for quite some time. I tried to use a clamp, but the way these clamps work, I was only able to get the clamp in on one end and not the other end, so I decided to just forego using those clamps and bite the bullet and just hold it in place for probably about 5-10 minutes or so. After what seemed like forever, I finally had a wall that was attached to the frame, and so far it's looking pretty good. So now that that's done, the next step is to go ahead and apply the back wall to the frame. Now if you recall, you have the beam that goes the full length of the barn that kind of protrudes at the front end, and that front wall had a slat that beam slides into, so I had kind of a guide to center the wall on the frame. Now that same guide was not here with this same wall piece, so I had to make sure everything was flush. And working on that front wall first, I kind of knew where the flush points were, so I was able to line those up effectively and put the wall in place. And much like the front of the wall, it took forever for me to affix it to this end because of some of the warping that happened in the weathering that we did earlier. Now it's time for the side walls to go on. I had to test fit this at first just to see how the walls corners would meet with the front and back end of the barn, and once I was confident I have it in a central location, I put the glue where it needed to go and dropped the wall in the place that it needed to be. And as has been the custom of this entire build, I've used unconventional means to clamp down the wall to hold it in place so that the glue can cure and the wall could be properly affixed to the barn. Boy, am I getting tired of that. Nevertheless, so far it's looking good. Here's that one side piece that's put on, and now the entire wall structure, front, back, side, and side, has been attached to the frame, and it is looking like a barn. And I love it. The trim pieces come on that sticky backed wood that usually comes with these type of kits. The only fallacy with that sticky back wood is that you can't really get to the edges of it without taking these pieces out. So to save me some time, I decided I was going to take some laminate paper that I purchased at Michael's and place the entire wooden sprue on that paper, cutting out an outline of the actual sprue itself, and then sticking that entire sprue on that clear laminate. Once I drop the wooden sprue on top of the laminate and am happy that it is completely flat, I start work on detaching the trim pieces from the parts where it attaches to the sprue. Once I trim the excess laminate from the edges, I start work on removing the actual wooden sprue from this sheet of laminate, only leaving the trim pieces in place with those nicely exposed edges. With the wooden sprue pieces removed, we have a new trim sheet that has all the trim pieces with their edges exposed to the point where we can actually get paint on the edges. So I start with spray painting everything a primer gray to get that paint process started. The next thing after that would be to start sponging on the wood color, starting with a burnt umber as the base and sponging that on all of the trim pieces. I then get me a lighter brown and decide to sponge that on top of the darker brown to get some variation in that wood color as well. And then after all that, it's time to hurry up and wait to put on the white. Now that piece has entered the house again, I start the process of applying the white to the trim, and doing so in layers so as not to completely obscure the brown wood color underneath. Now after all that work, we should have trim pieces that are effectively colored properly and have paint flowing to the edges of the trim as well. And here's a nice close-up shot of the work done.
Did you like that? You did? Perfect. Like, comment, subscribe, do all that other crazy jazz you need to do to get back to this channel next week where we start on part 3 of the HO Scale barn build. I look forward to seeing you there, and until next time, I'm Nathan, and have a great day.